Case 1. Stephen Neal Milner owned and operated a veterinary clinic in Oregon City. During that time, he entered into a personal relationship with Kelsey Fandrick, who worked for him and was married to Kenneth Fandrick. Milner was her employer, which placed him in a position of authority. The relationship was kept private, but it did not last. When Kelsey decided to end the relationship, she made it clear that she wanted it to come to an end. She chose to focus on her marriage and her family. Milner did not accept this decision. After the relationship ended, Milner's attention shifted toward Kelsey and her husband. Court evidence later revealed that he began following them and monitoring their daily activities. Kenneth Fandrick became increasingly concerned for his family's safety. Kelsey also felt unsafe. The unwanted attention did not fade with time. Instead, it continued and grew more serious, creating stress and fear for the couple. In March 2022, Kenneth Fandrick took a formal step to protect his family. He obtained a stalking protective order against Stephen Neal Milner. This order legally required Milner to stay away from Kenneth, Kelsey, and their family. It was a clear warning from the court. Violating the order would be a crime. Despite this, prosecutors later showed that Milner did not stop his behavior. He continued monitoring Kenneth's movements and looked for ways to stay close without being noticed. Investigators later found that Milner used tracking devices to follow the couple. He also took steps to avoid being recognized. These actions showed planning and intent. They were not brief or accidental. The behavior continued over a long period, even after the court order was in place. This history became a key part of the case against him. On January 27, 2023, Kenneth Fandrick went to work at the Intel Ronler Acres campus in Hillsboro, Oregon. He parked his vehicle in a parking structure, expecting a normal workday. Stephen Neal Milner was there. Security footage later showed Milner approaching Kenneth in the garage. The encounter quickly turned violent. Milner placed Kenneth in a chokehold. The pressure caused severe injuries to Kenneth's neck and spine. Kenneth Fandrick died at the scene. After the killing, Milner attempted to make the death appear natural. Prosecutors said he tried to position Kenneth's body in a way that would hide signs of violence. However, medical examiners found injuries that proved Kenneth had been killed by force. The autopsy showed trauma to the neck and spine that could not have happened naturally. Video footage, medical findings, and witness evidence all pointed to Milner as the attacker. Milner was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, stalking, and violating a protective order. During the trial, he chose to testify in his own defense. He claimed the encounter was an act of self-defense and said a struggle occurred. The jury reviewed the full history of the case, including the long period of stalking, the ignored court order, and the steps taken before the killing. The jury rejected Milner's explanation. In January 2025, a Washington County jury found Stephen Neal Milner guilty on all counts. The verdict confirmed that the killing of Kenneth Fandrick was not an accident and not justified. It also confirmed that Milner had repeatedly violated the law before the murder ever happened. The conviction brought legal closure, but it did not undo the loss suffered by Kelsey Fandrick and her family. In February 2025, Milner was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The judge noted the seriousness of the crime and the repeated choices Milner made to ignore warnings and legal boundaries. The sentence reflected both the loss of Kenneth Fandrick's life and the extended pattern of behavior that led up to the killing. Before we proceed to the next case, if you enjoy true crime videos, this is the right channel for you. I post interesting videos on the channel daily. Please support my channel by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you very much. Case 2. Mark Putnam held a position that came with authority, trust, and control over people who relied on him. As an FBI agent, he was expected to protect others, follow strict rules, and keep a professional distance at all times. Instead, his actions became one of the most serious examples of how a hidden workplace relationship, combined with power imbalance, can end in murder and permanently change an institution. Mark Putnam met Susan Smith through his work with the FBI. Susan Smith, whose full name appears in records as Susan Carol Smith, was 29 years old and worked as an FBI informant. Putnam was one of the agents she worked with. which placed him in a position of authority over her. FBI rules strictly forbade personal or romantic relationships between agents and informants. Despite this, Putnam began a secret sexual relationship with Susan Smith. At the time Putnam was married, Susan Smith believed the relationship mattered. She wanted reassurance and honesty. She wanted to know where she stood and whether she was being treated seriously. Mark Putnam, however, became increasingly afraid. He worried about his marriage, his career, and the serious consequences he could face if the relationship became known. As Susan pressed for clarity and continued contact, Putnam felt trapped. Investigators later explained that this fear of exposure played a central role in what followed. Mark Putnam arranged to meet Susan Smith on June 8, 1989, in Kentucky. He told her they needed to talk. During that meeting, Putnam killed Susan Smith by strangling her with his hands. The killing was deliberate. After her death, Putnam left her body in a wooded area. Susan Smith disappeared that day. Her family did not know what had happened to her. Susan Smith was reported missing 3 days later, on June 11, 1989, by her sister. Because Susan had connections to the FBI, her disappearance raised serious concerns. Searches were conducted, but her body was not found at that time. The case remained unresolved for months. During this period, Mark Putnam continued his life and his work while knowing exactly what had happened to Susan. Mark Putnam was questioned during the investigation. At first, he denied harming Susan Smith. Over time, pressure increased, evidence mounted. The truth could not stay hidden forever. In 1990, Putnam confessed to killing Susan Smith. After confessing, he led authorities to her remains, which confirmed the details of her death. The confession shocked law enforcement and the public. An FBI agent had killed an informant who trusted him. Mark Putnam's case moved into the legal system, and an important distinction must be clear. Although Putnam was a federal agent, the case was prosecuted in a state court. The proceedings took place in Pike County, Kentucky. Prosecutors initially pursued a murder charge, which carried the possibility of the death penalty under Kentucky law. To avoid a capital murder trial, Putnam entered a plea agreement. Mark Putnam pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in Kentucky State Court. As part of the plea deal, the court accepted that the killing occurred while Putnam was under extreme emotional duress. This legal finding reduced the charge from murder to manslaughter. In 1990, Putnam was sentenced to 16 years in prison. He served about 10 years before being released. The sentence did not erase the seriousness of the crime, but it reflected how the law classified the case under the plea agreement. Case 3. Lintel Washington spent her days teaching children and supporting students in her care. Friends and coworkers described her as steady, polite, and thoughtful. At the time of her death, Lintel was pregnant and quietly preparing for a future as a mother. She did not share much about her private life, but one part of it became central to what happened next. Lintel had been involved in a secret romantic relationship with a coworker, a man named Robert Marks, who worked in the same school district. That relationship, hidden from public view, would later sit at the center of a long and closely watched murder case. Lintel Washington was last seen alive on the night of April 23, 2016. That evening, she exchanged phone calls and text messages with Robert Marks. After those communications, she left home. When she did not return and failed to appear for work, concern grew quickly. Family members reported her missing. Co-workers said her disappearance was completely out of character. Lintel was known to keep in touch and to follow her routine. Her sudden silence raised alarms almost immediately. Lintel Washington's body was found on April 26, 2016, 3 days after she was last seen. Authorities discovered her in a ditch in Iberville Parish, Louisiana. She had been shot. Her unborn baby also died as a result of the shooting. At that point, the case officially became a homicide investigation. Law enforcement officers began working to rebuild her final days. Phone records, text messages, and witness accounts became key pieces of evidence as investigators tried to understand where she went and who she met. Lintel Washington's relationship with Robert Marks quickly became the main focus of the investigation. Marks was married and worked in the same school district as Lintel. Evidence showed that Lintel was pregnant with his child. Investigators learned that she wanted him to take responsibility for the pregnancy and to be open about their relationship. Prosecutors later explained that this placed Marks under intense pressure. He faced the possibility of losing his family, his career, and his standing in the community. That pressure became central to the state's case. Lintel Washington had been in frequent contact with Marks shortly before she disappeared. Phone records confirmed that they communicated on the night she was last seen. Investigators determined that she met with him that evening. According to the evidence presented in court, Marks shot Lintel during that encounter. After the killing, he left her body in Iberville Parish. There were no signs of a random attack. Everything pointed to a targeted act involving someone she knew and trusted. Lintel Washington's case did not move quickly through the courts. Instead, it stretched on for years. Prosecutors continued gathering evidence, reviewing digital records, and preparing for trial. Unlike many cases involving overwhelming evidence, Robert Marks did not plead guilty. He chose to take the case to trial. This decision delayed resolution for Lintel's family and kept the case active for more than 5 years after her death. Lintel Washington's murder trial finally took place in December 2021. Prosecutors presented phone records, testimony, forensic evidence, and proof of the pregnancy. They argued that Marks killed Lintel to avoid the consequences of the relationship becoming public. The defense challenged the state's case, but the jury was not persuaded. After hearing all the evidence, the jury deliberated for approximately 30 minutes before returning a verdict. Robert Marks was found guilty of capital murder in December 2021. Under Louisiana law, the killing of a pregnant woman qualifies for this charge. 2 months later, in February 2022, Marks was formally sentenced. The court imposed life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you found this video interesting so far, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for your support. Case 4. Carla Hughes was a middle school teacher in Mississippi whose actions turned a secret workplace relationship into a deadly crime that shocked her community and drew national attention. In November 2006, Hughes was involved in a hidden romantic relationship with a fellow teacher, Keon Pittman. Pittman was not single. He was engaged to Avis Banks, a young woman who was pregnant with his child. What began as a private affair between coworkers became the center of a murder case that would leave 2 lives lost and another permanently imprisoned. Carla Hughes and Keon Pittman both worked at Chastain Middle School in Madison County, Mississippi. Their relationship was kept quiet, but it created tension that grew over time. Avis Banks, Pittman's fiancée, was preparing for the future. She was expecting a baby and planning a life with Pittman. At the same time, Hughes was deeply upset about Pittman's engagement and the pregnancy. Investigators later showed that this emotional conflict played a major role in what followed. On November 29, 2006, Avis Banks was found dead in the garage of her home in Ridgeland, Mississippi. The attack was violent and clear in its intent. Banks had been shot multiple times, with bullets striking her leg, chest, and head. She was also stabbed many times in the face and neck. Her unborn child did not survive. The scene showed that this was not an accident or a sudden mistake. It was a deliberate act that ended 2 lives. Police began investigating people close to Banks. Attention quickly turned to Carla Hughes because of her connection to Pittman. At first, Hughes denied having an affair and denied having access to a gun. As the investigation continued, evidence began to point in her direction. Phone records showed contact between Hughes and Pittman. Witness statements raised questions about Hughes's movements around the time of the crime. A major break came when Hughes's cousin told police that she had borrowed his gun not long before the killing. Ballistics testing later linked that weapon to the murder. Hughes was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. 1 count was for the killing of Avis Banks. The second count was for the death of Banks's unborn child. The case went to trial in October 2009 in Madison County. During the trial, prosecutors laid out the full story. They explained the affair, the growing anger, and the steps Hughes took before the murder. Keon Pittman testified, describing his relationship with both women and the events leading up to the crime. The jury heard detailed evidence showing how Hughes planned and carried out the attack. The defense argued that Hughes was innocent and questioned the strength of the evidence. Hughes herself maintained that she did not commit the crime. Despite these claims, the jury found the prosecution's case convincing. After reviewing all the facts, the jury convicted Carla Hughes on both counts of capital murder. The verdict confirmed that the court believed Hughes was responsible for the deaths of Avis Banks and her unborn child. At sentencing, the judge imposed the maximum punishment allowed by law. Carla Hughes received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The sentences were ordered to be served one after the other. This meant Hughes would spend the rest of her life in prison with no chance of release. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime and the loss of 2 innocent lives. Case 5. Betty Broderick, a mother of 4 who lived in California and was once married to a well-known lawyer named Dan Broderick III. At the start of their marriage, Betty stayed home to raise their children while Dan worked long hours building his career. Over many years, Dan became very successful and wealthy as a medical malpractice attorney in San Diego. As his career grew, the marriage changed. Betty felt left out of important choices and felt her role in the family was being pushed aside. These changes marked the beginning of a long and painful breakdown of their family life. Betty Broderick began to notice serious problems in the early 1980s. In 1983, Dan hired a young woman named Linda Kolkina, who was in her early 20s, to work as his legal assistant. Linda spent many hours working closely with Dan. At this time, Dan was still married to Betty. Over time, Dan and Linda started a romantic relationship. Betty became aware of this relationship and felt deeply hurt. She believed the affair disrespected her role as a wife and mother. Arguments became common, and trust inside the marriage was gone. Betty Broderick went through a divorce that lasted several years and was filled with court battles. Dan controlled most of the money and legal decisions. Betty lost the family home and had limited access to the money she believed she deserved. Court orders restricted her behavior and contact with Dan. Friends later said Betty felt powerless and ignored by the system. She struggled emotionally and financially while Dan continued to live comfortably. The divorce was finalized in 1989, ending their marriage after more than a decade together. Dan Broderick married Linda Kolkina soon after the divorce was completed. This new marriage caused even more pain for Betty. She believed Linda had taken her place in both her marriage and her former life. Betty showed signs of anger that did not fade with time. Records later showed repeated phone calls, messages, and visits directed at Dan. Courts warned her to stop this behavior. These warnings were documented and later played an important role in court. Betty Broderick went to Dan and Linda's home in San Diego during the early morning hours of November 5, 1989. Dan and Linda were asleep in their bedroom. Betty used a handgun that had belonged to one of her children. Both Dan Broderick and Linda Kolkina Broderick were shot and killed while in bed. Police found no signs of a struggle. The facts showed the victims were unable to defend themselves. Betty later turned herself in and admitted she had been at the house. Betty Broderick told police she did not plan to kill Dan and Linda. She said she was overwhelmed by years of pain and stress. Prosecutors presented a different picture. They showed evidence of repeated threats and warnings made by Betty over several years. Neighbors, friends, and court records supported this history. The prosecution argued the killings were intentional. The defense argued that Betty acted without clear control due to emotional distress. These two views became central to the trial. Betty Broderick faced her first trial in 1990, which ended without a final verdict because jurors could not agree. A second trial followed in 1991. During this trial, the jury reviewed detailed evidence, including Betty's past behavior and the circumstances of the killings. After careful review, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. This verdict meant the jury believed the killings were intentional but not planned long in advance. Betty Broderick was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. This sentence meant she would not be eligible for parole until serving the minimum required time. Over the years, Betty applied for parole several times. Each request was denied due to lack of remorse and concerns about accountability. She remains incarcerated in California. Case 6. Sabrina Lyman was the wife of Robert Lyman, a U.S. Navy veteran, a working father, and a man deeply involved in his children's lives. From the outside, their family appeared stable. Robert worked hard and provided for his home. Sabrina cared for the children and worked part-time at a Costco warehouse. What few people knew was that Sabrina had begun a secret romantic relationship with a coworker named Jonathan Hearn. That hidden relationship would later become the central reason Robert Lyman lost his life. Sabrina Lyman met Jonathan Hearn while working at Costco. Hearn was also married. Over time, casual conversations turned into a private affair. Phone records and messages later showed the two stayed in frequent contact. Hearn wanted Sabrina to leave her husband and start a new life with him. Sabrina did not do that. She remained married to Robert while continuing the affair. Prosecutors later said this situation created growing frustration and anger. Hearn believed Robert was the one thing stopping him from being with Sabrina. That belief shaped what happened next. Sabrina Lyman's husband, Robert Lyman, was shot and killed on August 17, 2014. He was sitting inside his car near the family's home when the attack happened. There was no robbery. Nothing was taken from him. Investigators found no evidence that Robert had enemies or lived a risky life. His death left his children without their father and left his family searching for answers. At first, police treated the case as a targeted killing with no clear motive. Sabrina Lyman came under closer attention as detectives reviewed Robert's personal life. Phone records showed steady communication between Sabrina and Jonathan Hearn before and after the shooting. Investigators also confirmed the existence of the affair. This discovery changed the direction of the case. Detectives began focusing on motive connected to personal relationships rather than random violence. Jonathan Hearn was later arrested and questioned by police. Sabrina Lyman's case shifted dramatically when Jonathan Hearn admitted to killing Robert Lyman. Hearn told investigators that he shot Robert because he wanted to be with Sabrina. He claimed Sabrina knew about the plan and supported it after refusing his request that she divorce her husband. Prosecutors argued that Hearn felt desperate and believed murder was the only option left. His confession placed Sabrina at the center of the planning even though she was not the shooter. Sabrina Lyman was not arrested right away. Investigators continued working carefully, reviewing messages, call records, and witness statements. Nearly 2 years after Robert's death, Sabrina was arrested and charged with murder. Prosecutors said the evidence showed she encouraged the plan and did nothing to stop it. Sabrina Lyman's case went to trial in Kern County. Jonathan Hearn agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Sabrina, he accepted a 25-year prison sentence. During the trial, prosecutors presented phone data, messages, and testimony showing the ongoing affair and Hearn's motive. Hearn told the jury that his actions were driven by his desire to be with Sabrina. The defense argued that Hearn acted alone and that Sabrina should not be blamed for his choices. Sabrina Lyman was found guilty in 2017. The jury agreed with prosecutors that she played a key role in planning the crime. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison. Case 7. Thomas Montgomery worked regular shifts at a local manufacturing plant. To people around him, he seemed quiet and ordinary. Outside of work, he spent many hours online using fake profiles. Montgomery pretended to be a young U.S. Marine and used this false identity to talk to people in internet chat rooms. He believed he was building a close relationship with a young woman he met online. He became emotionally attached to this online connection and treated it as very real. Brian Barrett was 22 years old and worked at the same factory as Montgomery. Brian also spent time online and believed he was communicating with the same woman. Neither man fully understood the truth at first. The online profile both men believed in was fake. It was created and controlled by an adult woman and her teenage daughter. Even though the relationship was not real, the feelings Thomas Montgomery developed were real to him. He began to believe that Brian Barrett had taken something from him. Jealousy took hold of Montgomery. He felt embarrassed and angry. He blamed Brian Barrett for his emotional pain. At work, the two men continued their routines without open conflict. Coworkers did not see fights or arguments between them. The problem existed mostly inside Montgomery's thoughts, fed by online messages and imagined rivalry. Over time, Montgomery stopped seeing Brian as just a coworker. He saw him as an enemy. On September 15, 2006, Thomas Montgomery brought a rifle to the factory parking lot in Lockport. Brian Barrett was sitting inside his truck after work. Montgomery approached the vehicle and fired 3 shots at close range. The attack happened quietly. No witnesses were rushing outside, and no immediate discovery. Brian Barrett died inside his truck. His body remained there, unnoticed. For 2 full days, Brian Barrett's truck stayed parked in the lot. No one realized what had happened. It was only when a coworker noticed that Brian had not shown up for work and that his truck had not moved that someone checked on him. Brian Barrett was found dead inside the vehicle. The discovery shocked coworkers and the wider community. A young man had been killed, and no one knew for days. Police arrested Thomas Montgomery soon after the discovery. During questioning, Montgomery admitted to shooting Brian Barrett. Investigators searched his home and computer. They found chat logs, fake profiles, and online messages that explained the jealousy and obsession behind the crime. The evidence showed that Montgomery allowed an online fantasy to guide his actions in the real world. Instead of going through a full murder trial, Thomas Montgomery accepted a plea deal. In August 2007, he pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. This plea allowed him to avoid a murder trial. The court sentenced him to 20 years in prison. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime while acknowledging the plea agreement. After serving about 17 years, he was released on parole on January 11, 2024. His release came under supervision and conditions set by the parole system. Even with his release, the harm caused by his actions remains permanent. A life was lost, families were changed, and a community was shaken. Case 8. Shauna Nelson was a police dispatcher in Greeley, Colorado, whose job placed her inside the daily workings of law enforcement. She handled emergency calls, tracked officer locations, and understood how police schedules operated. Through her work, she came into contact with Ignacio Garaus, a Greeley police officer. Over time, a secret romantic relationship developed between them. Ignacio Garaus was married to Heather Garaus, and together they had a young daughter named Victoria, who was about 8 or 9 years old in 2007. This hidden workplace relationship became the starting point of a crime that would destroy a family and leave lasting damage on an entire community. Shauna Nelson wanted a future with Ignacio Garaus. She believed their relationship meant more than it did. Evidence later showed that Shauna had previously been pregnant with Ignacio's child, a son. At the time, Shauna was married to Ken Nelson, who agreed to raise the child as his own. Despite this, Shauna continued to want Ignacio to leave his wife and start a life with her. That never happened. Ignacio remained married to Heather and continued living as a husband and father. This situation caused strong emotional pressure and frustration for Shauna. Heather Garaus was not distant or hidden from view. She was present in Ignacio's life and well known in the community. She worked at a local credit union and lived a normal family life with her daughter. Prosecutors later said Shauna Nelson came to see Heather as the person blocking the future she wanted. This belief became central to the case. On the morning of January 23, 2007, Heather Garaus went to work as usual. It was still early when she arrived at the credit union in Greeley. As she walked across the parking lot toward the building, a person approached her. Witnesses later told police the attacker wore a black mask and a hooded jacket. The attacker ordered Heather to get down on her knees. Moments later, Heather was shot at close range. Prosecutors described the killing as deliberate and controlled. Heather was unarmed. She had no chance to escape or protect herself. The attack happened during normal morning hours in a public place. People nearby heard the gunshot or saw parts of the scene afterward. Police responded quickly. Because Heather was married to a police officer, the case immediately received serious attention. Officers understood the urgency and the need to find the person responsible. Investigators began reviewing every detail. They examined phone records, work schedules, security footage, and witness statements. They looked closely at Heather's daily routine and the people connected to Ignacio Garaus. The investigation soon turned toward Shauna Nelson. Evidence showed she had a romantic relationship with Ignacio and wanted Heather out of his life. Prosecutors later explained that Shauna Nelson's role as a dispatcher gave her inside knowledge. She understood how police units moved, how calls were handled, and how response times worked. Investigators tracked her movements before and after the murder. They also reviewed her communications and behavior. The evidence painted a picture of planning and preparation. Police concluded that Shauna Nelson carried out the killing herself. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The arrest stunned the community. A person trusted to help with police operations was now accused of killing a police officer's wife. During the trial, jurors heard detailed testimony about the affair between Shauna Nelson and Ignacio Garaus. They learned about Shauna's past pregnancy with Ignacio's child and her belief that a future together was being denied. Witnesses described the attacker's clothing, actions, and commands on the morning of the killing. Prosecutors argued that the evidence showed clear intent and planning. They told the jury this was not a random act and not a moment of panic. The defense challenged parts of the case, but the jury focused on the full timeline and the weight of the evidence. After reviewing everything presented in court, the jury reached its decision. In 2008, Shauna Nelson was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Case 9. Thomas Capano was well known in political and legal circles. He came from a respected family, worked as an attorney, and had strong ties to state government. Many people trusted him. At the same time, Anne Marie Fahey was building her own future. She worked as a scheduling secretary for Delaware Governor Thomas Carper and was known as organized, reliable, and serious about her career. Their professional paths crossed through government work, and a hidden relationship began. Anne Marie Fahey was in her early 30s and wanted a stable and honest life. Thomas Capano was married, which meant the relationship stayed secret. Over time, the affair became stressful for Fahey. Friends later said she wanted it to end. She began seeing someone else and tried to move forward. Evidence later showed that Capano did not accept this. He kept contacting her and struggled with losing control over the relationship. What had started as a private office affair slowly became a source of fear and pressure for Fahey. June 27, 1996, became the most important date in the case. That afternoon, Anne Marie Fahey left work and met with Thomas Capano. This was the last confirmed time she was seen alive. After that meeting, she vanished. She did not return home. She did not contact friends or family. This behavior was completely unlike her. As hours turned into days, concern grew. On June 30, 1996, her family reported her missing. Police began reviewing her recent movements and the people closest to her. Because of his close connection to Fahey, Capano became a major focus early on. The early search was difficult. There was no body and no clear crime scene. Even so, police continued examining details. Phone records showed frequent contact between Capano and Fahey near the time she disappeared. People who knew them described Capano as upset and distressed after the relationship ended. His behavior stood out. As the case grew more complex and public interest increased, federal authorities joined the effort. More than a year later, the case changed direction. In November 1997, Capano's younger brother, Jerry Capano, spoke with police. He said Thomas had confessed to killing Anne Marie Fahey. According to his statement, Fahey was shot inside Thomas Capano's home during an argument. Her body was placed inside a large cooler. The brothers then used Jerry Capano's boat to dump the cooler into the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of New Jersey. Despite extensive searches, Anne Marie Fahey's body was never recovered. Another important detail came out during the investigation and trial. Evidence showed that Capano had asked another woman he was involved with, Deborah McIntyre, to buy a gun for him. She purchased the firearm, later identified as the murder weapon. Prosecutors used this detail to show planning and intent. Capano later tried to turn this fact into a defense. He claimed McIntyre had accidentally shot Fahey. The jury did not believe this story. They viewed it as an attempt to shift blame and avoid responsibility. Thomas Capano was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case drew attention across the country. Many people were shocked that a well-connected lawyer could face such serious charges. The trial began in late 1998. Prosecutors presented a clear timeline of the relationship, the breakup, and the steps Capano took after Fahey disappeared. Phone records, witness testimony, statements from Jerry Capano, and evidence about the gun purchase all supported the case. The defense argued that the case was weak because Anne-Marie Fahey's body had never been found. They also pushed the claim of an accidental shooting involving Deborah McIntyre. The jury rejected these arguments. They focused on the pattern of behavior, the planning involved, and Capano's actions after Fahey vanished. In January 1999, Thomas Capano was found guilty of first-degree murder. At sentencing, Capano was initially given the death penalty. This decision was unusual because the victim's body had never been recovered. Later, the Delaware Supreme Court overturned the death sentence because the jury had not been unanimous on the required factors. After that ruling, Capano was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas Capano spent the rest of his life in prison. He died in custody in September 2011. Anne-Marie Fahey's family was left without her and without a grave to visit. Case 10. Robert Hall lived in Meridian, Idaho in 2011 with his wife Candy Hall, believing they were building a shared life together. Robert worked regular hours and trusted his family situation. What he did not know at first was that his marriage was already breaking apart in secret. The events that followed would turn a private betrayal into a deadly confrontation and a prison sentence that changed many lives forever. Candy Hall worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Idaho. During her time there, she began a secret relationship with her boss, Emmett Corrigan. Emmett was a married attorney and a father of 5 children. The relationship between Candy and Emmett continued for months without Robert's knowledge. It took place quietly, away from the office, while both tried to keep it hidden from their families. During this time, Robert believed his marriage was intact, unaware that trust had already been broken. Eventually, Robert Hall learned about the affair. The discovery deeply upset him. Testimony later showed that emotions were high and that the situation inside the Hall family was tense. Still, life continued day by day, until one moment brought everything to a sudden and violent end. On March 11, 2011, Candy Hall met Emmett Corrigan at a Walgreens parking lot in Meridian. The meeting was planned. Candy drove her own vehicle, and Emmett arrived in his truck. The two had sexual contact inside Emmett's truck while parked at the store. During this time, Candy's daughter noticed her mother's car parked at Walgreens and told Robert. This detail became a turning point in the case. After learning where Candy was, Robert Hall drove to the Walgreens parking lot. While Robert was on his way, Candy received a phone call from him. Instead of ending the call, Emmett Corrigan took the phone. According to court testimony, Emmett spoke directly to Robert and told him to wait, saying they would be coming right out. Prosecutors later argued that this phone call increased the tension and helped set the stage for what followed. When Emmett and Candy returned to the parking lot, Robert was already there. A confrontation took place between Robert Hall and Emmett Corrigan. Words were exchanged. The situation quickly became physical. During the trial, Candy testified that she saw Emmett shove Robert. She said she turned away before hearing gunshots. She did not witness the exact moment the shots were fired. Robert Hall shot Emmett Corrigan twice. One bullet struck Emmett in the head, another struck him in the chest. Emmett Corrigan died at the scene. The parking lot, which had been an ordinary public place, became a crime scene within moments. The affair that had stayed hidden for months ended in seconds with a man dead. After shooting Emmett, Robert Hall turned the gun on himself and fired a shot at his own head. The wound was not fatal. The bullet caused only a grazing injury. Prosecutors later argued that this was not a genuine suicide attempt, but an act meant to appear that way. Emergency responders treated Robert and he survived. Police arrested Robert Hall and charged him with second-degree murder. From the beginning, the case drew attention because it involved a workplace affair, a public confrontation, and a killing in broad daylight. Investigators reviewed phone records, witness statements, and physical evidence from the scene. Robert Hall's trial took place in October 2012. His defense team argued that he acted in self-defense. They claimed Robert felt threatened during the confrontation and reacted out of fear. Prosecutors strongly disagreed. They presented evidence that suggested Robert had time to think, travel to the location, and bring a gun with him. They argued the shooting was not a sudden act of fear, but a deliberate decision fueled by anger and betrayal. The jury listened to testimony from Candy Hall, law enforcement officers, and other witnesses. They reviewed evidence from the parking lot and heard arguments from both sides. After considering all of the facts, the jury rejected the self-defense claim. Robert Hall was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to up to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 17.5 years. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime and the loss of Emmett Corrigan's life. Case 11. Suzanne Pilley worked for IML, a property investment company based on Thistle Street in Edinburgh. Suzanne lived a calm, structured life. She followed routines, arrived at work on time, and stayed in close contact with her family. She did not take risks, and she did not disappear without reason. Because of this, her disappearance in May 2010 caused immediate fear among those who knew her best. Suzanne Pilley left her home on the morning of Tuesday, May 4, 2010, to walk to her office near the Haymarket area. She carried her handbag, phone, and keys, just as she did every weekday. CCTV cameras showed her walking her normal route. She looked calm and focused. She was not upset or rushing. Suzanne never arrived at work. When she failed to answer calls and did not return home that evening, her family reported her missing. From the start, police believed this behavior was completely out of character. Suzanne worked in the same office as David Gilroy, a senior manager at IML. The two had previously been involved in a secret romantic relationship. David was older and held authority over Suzanne at work. Over time, the relationship caused Suzanne stress and worry. By early 2010, Suzanne decided it had to end. She wanted distance and a professional working environment. Emails and messages later shown in court made it clear that Suzanne communicated this decision. She wanted the relationship over. David did not accept this. Suzanne felt pressure because the relationship was connected to her job. David's position made it difficult for her to fully remove herself from him. Friends later told police that Suzanne felt anxious about how ending the relationship could affect her career. She wanted peace and stability. David continued to push for contact. This imbalance between personal boundaries and workplace power became a key issue in the case. As the search continued, police examined CCTV footage, phone records, bank activity, and computer data. Suzanne's phone stopped all activity shortly after she left home that morning. Her bank accounts were untouched. She made no travel plans and packed nothing at home. Investigators concluded she had not left voluntarily. Everything pointed to her being harmed shortly after starting her walk to work. Because Suzanne's body was never found, the investigation relied heavily on digital and circumstantial evidence. Attention soon focused on David Gilroy. His statements to police did not match electronic records or witness accounts. Computer data showed activity that conflicted with his version of events. Investigators also found evidence that he tried to mislead the inquiry by creating false impressions about Suzanne's movements. These actions raised serious concern. Suzanne Pilley's case went to trial in 2012 at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. Prosecutors presented a detailed timeline built from CCTV footage, workplace records, phone data, and testimony. They explained the workplace relationship, Suzanne's decision to end it, and David Gilroy's response. The court heard that Suzanne was last seen walking toward work and never left the area alive. The prosecution argued that she was killed on the same day she vanished. Even though Suzanne's remains were never recovered, the jury accepted the strength of the evidence. They concluded that Suzanne Pilley had been murdered and that David Gilroy was responsible. The conviction was important because it showed that a murder charge could be proven without a body when the evidence was clear and consistent. The verdict reflected careful examination of every detail presented during the trial. David Gilroy was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years before parole could be considered. The judge stated that the absence of Suzanne's body did not reduce the seriousness of the crime. The court also noted Gilroy's lack of honesty during the investigation. The sentence confirmed that Suzanne's life was taken by someone she knew through her workplace. Case 12. Lily James was a 21-year-old woman at the very beginning of her adult life when she was killed inside her workplace in Sydney, Australia. In 2023, Lily worked as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, a well-known school in the city. She loved sport, teaching, and helping young people grow in confidence. Friends described her as kind, energetic, and hopeful about the future. She had plans, goals, and people who cared deeply about her. A school is meant to be a place of safety. What happened there on October 25, 2023, shocked Australia and revealed how serious danger can exist even in trusted work environments. Lily James worked closely with another water polo coach named Paul Tyson. They were coworkers and had a short personal relationship. The relationship ended, and Lily made her position clear. She wanted to move on with her life and focus on her job and her future. Friends later said she set firm boundaries and did not want further contact. For Lily, the relationship was over. Evidence later showed that Paul Tyson did not accept this decision. After the breakup, Lily continued living her normal life. She kept coaching, attending games, and supporting students. There was no public sign that she believed she was in danger. To those around her, everything appeared normal. This is one reason the case caused such deep shock. A young woman should be able to continue her job safely after ending a relationship with a coworker. Findings from the coronial inquest later showed that what happened was not sudden or emotional in the moment. It was highly planned and deliberate. In the days before the murder, Paul Tyson stalked Lily James multiple times. He paid close attention to her routine and movements. He used location-sharing technology, including SnapMap, to monitor where she was and when she would be alone. This showed preparation and intent, not impulse. CCTV footage revealed even more disturbing details. Hours before the murder, Tyson was captured on camera buying a hammer, the weapon he later used. After purchasing it, he returned to St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Cameras showed him entering and leaving the exact staff bathroom where the attack would later take place. Investigators confirmed he practiced movements in and around the bathroom stall. These actions were described as practice runs, showing he was preparing in advance. Tyson also controlled the environment inside the school. He placed a "cleaning in progress" sign on a different bathroom. This was done to block access and direct Lily toward the bathroom he had already chosen. This detail was important because it showed the location of the attack was selected and prepared ahead of time. Nothing about the setting was accidental. On October 25, 2023, Lily James coached a school water polo game earlier in the day. That evening, at around 7:14 p.m., she returned to St. Andrew's Cathedral School. She came back to change clothes so she could attend her own water polo game afterward. Students were no longer on campus, but staff areas were still accessible. For Lily, this was part of her normal routine and gave no reason for fear. Inside the school, Lily entered the staff bathroom. There, she was attacked by Paul Tyson. Police later confirmed the attack was violent and targeted. Lily James died at the scene. Emergency services were called, but she could not be saved. The school was closed, and parents, staff, and students were informed. News of the killing spread quickly across the country. Police identified Paul Tyson as the attacker soon after the incident. Investigators confirmed the motive was personal and directly linked to the ended relationship. There was no robbery, no stranger involved, and no misunderstanding. The evidence showed that the killing was planned over time, using tracking, preparation, and control of the location. After the murder, Tyson disappeared. A large police search began, covering land and coastal areas around Sydney. The search continued for 2 days. On October 27, 2023, police found Paul Tyson's body in the water near Diamond Bay, a coastal cliff area. Authorities confirmed he had taken his own life. With his death, there would be no criminal trial. The investigation ended, but the loss remained. Case 13. Laurie DuPont worked as a registered nurse at Hotel Dieu Grace Hospital in Windsor, Ontario, in 2005. She was known by coworkers as caring, professional, and committed to her patients. Nursing was not just her job, it was her purpose. Laurie went to work every day expecting the hospital to be a safe place where people looked after one another. What she was facing in her personal life made that safety fragile, even inside a healthcare workplace. Laurie DuPont had previously been in a romantic relationship with a colleague, Dr. Mark Daniel, a physician at the same hospital. When the relationship ended, Laurie tried to move forward with her life. She focused on her work and wanted clear boundaries. Dr. Daniel did not accept the end of the relationship. His behavior became unwanted and troubling. Laurie spoke to people she trusted and shared that she was afraid. She raised concerns about her safety. These concerns were known within the workplace, but the situation was not resolved in a way that protected her. Laurie DuPont continued working regular shifts at the hospital while dealing with fear that followed her into her place of work. Hospitals are busy environments, filled with patients, staff, and constant movement. Despite this, Laurie was still vulnerable. The presence of her former partner in the same workplace meant she could not fully escape the situation. The line between personal life and professional space had completely broken down. Laurie DuPont was killed on November 12, 2005, while she was working her shift at Hotel Dieu Grace Hospital. Dr. Mark Daniel attacked her inside the hospital and stabbed her multiple times. Staff and patients were nearby when the attack happened. Laurie suffered fatal injuries and died. After killing her, Dr. Daniel took his own life. In a matter of minutes, a place dedicated to healing became the scene of a violent death. Laurie DuPont's murder shocked the hospital, the city of Windsor, and the entire country. Nurses, doctors, and patients struggled to understand how such violence could happen in a healthcare setting. For Laurie's family, the loss was devastating. They lost a daughter and a sister who had tried to protect herself by speaking up. Her death raised painful questions about responsibility, warning signs, and what happens when those warnings are not acted on. Laurie DuPont's case did not end with her death. It led to a major Ontario coroner's inquest, which examined how the hospital and wider systems responded to the risks she faced. The inquest heard testimony from coworkers, supervisors, and experts. It found that clear warning signs existed before the killing. Laurie had expressed fear. There were known concerns about her safety. The inquest concluded that the system failed to protect her. If you enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to my channel. I create and post interesting true crime videos on the channel daily. Thank you for watching.